Welcome to Be Well, an It's Okay webinar designed to promote and support mental, financial, physical, and social well-being. Be Well provides insights, tips, and strategies for enhancing all aspects of well-being through conversations with experts. Whether you want to manage stress, improve your financial health, boost your physical well-being, or enrich your social relationships, this webinar is a go-to resource.
I'm Kate Fisher. I lead the It's Okay campaign. Today's conversation is part of our It's Okay campaign, and it's built on a simple and important idea. It's okay to be honest about what we're experiencing at work and in life. And today we're going to apply that same honesty to the topic of neurodiversity, because 1 in 5 people is neurodivergent. And that means that at any time, in any meeting, in any building at Cummins, there are people who are navigating a workplace that was not designed for how their brains may work. Some people know it. Some people are just starting to figure it out. Most of the managers who want to support people, they're doing their best, but they don't really have a roadmap on how to support people who are neurodivergent. If you are neurodiverse, we hope that you leave today feeling seen and with information that you can use to thrive. If you are a manager of someone who may be neurodiverse, we hope that you leave with more confidence in how to support them and leverage their skills. And if you are here because you care about people and you want to be a better teammate, there is something here for you as well. And so today we have 2 experts with us who bring different perspectives to this topic. We have Tarina Schanneberger. Tell me if I said that wrong. We just talked about me and my terrible pronunciations. Tarina is Senior Program Manager for Inclusive Hiring at Microsoft. Microsoft is widely recognized as one of the leaders in employer supporting neurodiversity programs in the world. So we'll talk to Tarina about what Microsoft is doing. And we have Kevon Stassen, PhD. He is the director at the Frist Center for Autism and Innovation. He is a Stevenson Endowed Professor of Physics and Astronomy and a professor of computer science and professor of management at Vanderbilt University. And he has spent years studying the data about how neurodiverse people experience work and what organizations can do differently to embrace and to support and benefit from individuals who are neurodiverse and have this skill set. So welcome, Tarina and Kevon. Thank you for joining us. And I would love if you could each kind of briefly give us an overview of your work and what you do in this field. I'll start with you, Kevon.
Great. Good morning. Good to be with you. Thanks for having us. As you just heard, I direct the Frist Center for Autism and Innovation at Vanderbilt University. We are an academic research center that within the university lives within the School of Engineering and the Business School. So it's pretty unusual if you look across, the research space where autism and neurodiversity research often reside is in the medical world, sort of, the clinical world, maybe special education. Those are all very important, of course. But what we wanted to do was to create something new and complementary that focused on, and our mission statement is to develop technologies and to transform the workplace for autistic adults and people with other forms of neurodiversity. In just a sentence, our work focuses on 3 different areas. One is on developing model academic programs in higher education to support autistic and other neurodivergent students in college and beyond, which can be so important for preparing for high-level careers. Secondly, we're developing assistive technologies based in virtual reality and artificial intelligence to provide safe learning and training experiences for autistic and other neurodivergent adults to be ready for the workplace. And third and finally, we're working with companies, major employers, such as with Microsoft, to create real pipelines to employment.
That's awesome. It's wonderful. Thank you. And Trina, can you tell us about what you do at Microsoft and what Microsoft is doing?
Yeah, of course. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me here today. I have a special place in my heart for Cummins. My aunt, I'm based in Washington State, but my aunt and uncle both spent their entire career working at Cummins, and they were the family that we'd always go visit every summer. I spent every summer in Indiana, and so I was happy to hear this invite and to hear that Cummins is invested in um, inclusion. So. Uh, a little bit about me. I work at Microsoft on the accessibility team. Accessibility at Microsoft is under our Chief Accessibility Officer, and we all work on different parts of accessibility, disability inclusion, neurodiversity. Many of my colleagues work with our engineering team, so they're working on accessibility of our products to make sure that everyone can use them. I work more on the people side of accessibility. So my work really focuses on creating a more accessible employee experience and experience for job seekers, supporting managers. When I first started in this role, I think I was I think it was 2018. It might have been 2017, 8 or 9 years ago. I should probably look back and remember that date. But I was brought in at the time to run our autism hiring program, which is now our neurodiversity hiring program. And over those last 8, 9 years, we've taken the learnings. So that program's still around, and I'll talk about it today. But we've taken those learnings for how that program supports job seekers, how it supports employees, how it supports managers, and we've partnered across teams at Microsoft. So lots of teams in HR, benefits, accommodations, manager excellence, you name it, accommodate within HR. We've probably touched it at some point in time. We've also partnered with our research and engineering teams to really better understand how people experience the workplace and how they experience technology and how we can design solutions that work better for everyone. So, um, I think what I enjoy most is just bringing together people with different perspectives and lived experience. Everything we've done has been shaped with our neurodivergent employees at Microsoft. They have the best ideas, they're living it every day and taking those ideas and building on them. So happy to be a part of today's conversation, learn from my fellow panelists, Kayvon, and share this topic with all of you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us. We're excited to dive into this topic. And so I have a question really for both of you as we get into this. Can we sort of set the stage by talking about what it means to be what do we mean by neurodiverse? How would each of you define neurodiversity and what conditions or experience does it include for you? Kiban? And I'm sorry, I'll switch it up. You're on my left, and I tend to go left to right. So
He is the academic in this place. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, well, I would say, I mean, neurodiversity is a word, okay? It's just a word. It's a helpful word because it kind of helps us summarize a bunch of stuff in a single word. But it is just a word, and so the real question is sort of how has the community chosen to define that word? And I think there's a general consensus that when we talk about neurodiversity or neurodivergence, we're talking about a constellation of conditions that at one time may have been regarded as disorders or purely as disability. Um, I think many folks who experience these conditions still very often um, talk about the importance of recognizing the disability aspect of those conditions, but where there's now a broader understanding that alongside support needs, there are also strengths and capabilities, and in many cases, kind of a difference in cognitive wiring that can allow for different ways of seeing things, approaching problems in different ways. But in terms of the specific conditions that I think there's a broad consensus are included within the neurodiversity or neurodivergence umbrella, we're talking about autism, ADHD, dyslexia, dyscalculia, um, perhaps a couple of other things, but those are the main ones, and those are the ones that together we now have a pretty good estimate constitute somewhere between 15 and 20% of the human population. I'll say just one more thing on this, and be really interested to hear Tarina's take on this too. I think there's also been an emerging consensus within the neurodiversity community itself that it continues to be important to um, to recognize that that autistic people, even within even where there are broad similarities within the neurodiversity, set of experiences, that the autism community specifically has a kind of a unique set of needs and challenges, and potentially abilities as well. And so more and more at the Frisk Center, we've chosen to keep the word autism specifically in our name, the Center for Autism and Innovation, even as we support all neurodivergent people. But increasingly, we've come to try to consistently use the term autism and other forms of neurodiversity, just to really kind of keep up with where the thinking is within the neurodiversity community as itself.
Thank you.
Yeah. So building on kind of where you started, in that the community, how the community has chosen to define neurodiversity, and really listening to each individual and the community as a whole, and they how they define neurodiversity, because it's still a relatively new term for many people. And so what we did a few years ago is we worked with our community here. At the time, it was our ERG. Now they're called our inclusion networks. But I've always had an advisory group, and we brought in a bunch of neurodivergent employees at Microsoft. And we're like, let's come up with how we as Microsoft want to share the definition of neurodiversity internally. And when we did that, we really aligned on that it's a natural variation in how human brains think, learn, process information, communicate, and experience the world, and that there isn't one right way for the brain to work, and people simply have different ways of processing information. They have different strengths and they have different challenges. As Kayvon mentioned, the umbrella term includes different conditions, such as those he listed: ADHD, autism, dyslexia, dysgraphia. Our neurodiversity community at Microsoft has subgroups for each different condition. I think they're up to like 20 now. So, I mean, it can be a really huge umbrella. And it's, it, to your question about really the different needs of someone who's autistic, I think that we do see that. And we see that, we first saw that when we transitioned our program from autism to neurodiversity. There wasn't a lot of additional changes and modifications we needed to make, because we had made those modifications for autistic candidates. Had it been the reverse and we were bringing in autistic candidates, I think we would have modified things more so. Um, but really, I mean, I guess the key takeaway here is just thinking about that it is important to focus less on labels and knowing someone's exact diagnosis, and that it's important to focus on their strengths that they bring. They may bring different perspectives, ways of problem solving, ways of communicating, and that's really what drives innovation within the workplaces.
Less about labels, more about just general inclusion.
Yeah.
So that's awesome. Um, so, and thank you both for that. I think that's very helpful as we talk about this. I want to start with Microsoft's approach. And so, Trina, I'm going to direct this question at you. Microsoft is widely recognized as a leader in neurodiverse hiring and inclusion. So, can you walk us through how that program actually started, and the problem you were trying to solve, or sort of what was the history and the evolution of this program at Microsoft?
Yeah, yeah. So when I joined, the program had been around for about 2 or 3 years. I think it's really important to note that Microsoft has always been hiring autistic individuals, always been hiring neurodivergent talent. Bill Gates recently came out with his most recent book, because he's been interviewed and talked about how if he were a child today, he would likely be diagnosed with autism. So this is nothing new that Microsoft it's not like we just started hiring autistic individuals, but in 2015, what we did is that we recognized that there were possibly talented candidates that were unintentionally being screened out by our traditional hiring processes. We know that, 1 in 5, the numbers are, you know, somewhere around 1 in 5 individuals are neurodivergent. However, the majority is still neurotypical, and many processes are designed by individuals who are neurotypical. And so we know that those traditional interviews often measure how well someone interviews rather than how well they can perform the job. And so we saw this as an opportunity to think differently about that front door into Microsoft. So in 2015, we had a newly formed accessibility team. We had strong executive sponsorship, which is really key. And we had engineering teams that were ready to hire the talent that we brought in. Different front door, same roles, same expectations. We weren't changing the job. We weren't changing the expectations of the job. We were designing a different front door into Microsoft and providing support when those employees joined. So over the years, the hiring program has evolved, but this same goal has remained to remove the barriers and provide the right support so that candidates can showcase their strengths. And since 2015, we've run over 50 hiring cohorts, which are our hiring events where we're hiring multiple people into multiple roles. We've hired into 35 different roles across Microsoft. Sure, we started with engineering, but now we're across all business functions, lots of the product groups, sales. We've hired into our data centers. When we had retail stores, we hired in there, and then we closed them all. And now we have teams in the US and Asia and EMEA that are working full time on neurodiversity hiring. So what has started as a hiring initiative, it's grown year over year. It continues to hire more people every year. But really what we think about is taking the learnings from that program. And what my manager always likes to say is he calls it the red thread. How do we take those learnings and how do we bring them across the entire business so that we can support all candidates coming in, all employees at the company, and all managers? And so we'll kind of talk a bit more about that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's amazing. And so it's really interesting to see a program like this evolve. And I know that recruitment is the door in, but beyond recruitment, when you think about just day-to-day inclusion for a neurodiverse employee at Microsoft, like what does that look like? Well, how does Microsoft then continue to support them?
Yeah. So I think that it's really made up of a few different pieces. And I would start with managers. I think we've already talked about the importance of managers and how they can best support their neurodivergent employees on their team. So this is an area that we've invested really heavily in. We're lucky that at Microsoft, our manager philosophy is model coach care. But we build on that and we click down into help managers support their neurodiverse employees on their team. This has been done through, we offer monthly coaching drop-in sessions. So we have 18,000 managers at Microsoft, and it's available to all of them. If they have an employee who shared that they're neurodivergent, if they even may think that their employee is neurodivergent, they can come to these coaching sessions, they can ask questions, and when they do join, they join with a really open mind. They join to learn, they join to walk away with tools, they join to learn from other managers, from coaches. And so what we find is that in the moment, just in time coaching is really important to help managers learn what they may not know. And so
Yeah.
having different training videos and quick guides that have been created for more asynchronous learning. We also really focus on driving awareness across the organization. So we have a global communication strategy that focuses in on key moments in time, like Neurodiversity Celebration Week, but it has this regular rhythm of reaching employees across the company to drive awareness with a strength-based message around neurodiversity. With that, we also offer drop-in instructor-led sessions to learn about neurodiversity, and then a whole ton of different asynchronous learning as well. And um, and then reaching employees. So reaching our employees to let them know what's available to them, whether it's benefits. We have executive function coaching that any employee can sign up for. It's through their EAP program. There's no need to disclose or share any information with their manager or HR. We want to make sure they know and have a lot of clarity around our accommodations process, the coaching resources available to them, the community is available to them. So a lot of it's about discoverability and continuing
Mhm.
to share messaging over and over so that when people need it, they know where to find it, they know what it is.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. That's great to, it is that over and over piece, I think that is the
Yeah.
most critical, that we find that as well. I'm going to pivot over to you, Kivan, in the research. And your research, it has a very realistic, often difficult picture of what neurodiverse individuals face at work. So when you think about the data, what does it show us that organizations maybe aren't acknowledging or, aren't doing for a neurodiverse, employee in the workplace?
Yeah, thank you. And maybe I'll start with a kind of a segue from something that Tarina mentioned toward the beginning of her last answer, having to do with the interview or the intake or the onboarding process. I think it's really, really important to acknowledge that while most of what we're going to be talking about today appropriately is in relation to the folks with, in our organizations who are neurodivergent and their challenges and needs and, and abilities, um, there's an enormous, talent pool that aren't in our organizations, and largely because of the experience right at the front door, as it were. Traditional methods of interviewing where the differences in communication style, ways that neurodiversity can just manifest itself or present itself on the surface, can lead to first impressions that just kind of immediately shut that door before people have a chance to even get into our organizations. Um, or, sort of, people who are hired and then immediately experience as part of intake or onboarding, again, sort of differences in communication, differences in how intent and affect, cause sort of, misimpressions or misinterpretations can lead people to then be just sort of let go almost as soon as they were brought on board. So I think it's really important to acknowledge that. Um,
Yeah.
in fact, the research shows us that that's kind of the majority of the challenge from the standpoint of employing a neurodivergent workforce is that large talent pool that isn't even getting in.
Right,
And
right.
a lot of what Microsoft is doing has been innovating around that. But in terms of the folks who are in our organizations and are surviving, if not thriving, I think what the research tells us is the lack of thriving very often comes down to kind of one thing, and that has to do again with differences in communication. Um, and so where organizations learn to, as just as a part of their organizational culture, to prize, value, reward precision and professionalism in communication, um, concreteness, clarity in communication, as opposed to nudge, nudge, wink, wink, double entendre, you know,
Hmm.
kind of, you have to be able to read between the lines or kind of understand just what's under the surface of what's being said, or kind of like piece standard operating procedure together from kind of collective blah, blah, blah. Like, organizations that operate that way. And traditionally, that's how many of our organizations have operated. You're sort of expected to kind of like figure it out, kind of like by osmosis or something. And where part of how people traditionally have been evaluated in our organizations has been in no small part on their ability to do the kind of small talk, water cooler thing. We're beginning to learn that organizations that are more successful overall are successful overall because, in part, they've learned how to include the perspectives and abilities of people who communicate and understand intent differently. And the bottom line, right, Tarina, is communicate clearly, concretely, and value precision and professionalism in communication.
Okay, I think that it's probably something that gets undervalued in most companies, which kind of leads me to my um to my next question. You've touched a little bit on, how the research supports what we heard from, Trina about Microsoft's approach, but and there are often times that an organization will say it's inclusive, but there can be a gap between, intent and reality. So an organization says it's inclusive. Do neurodiverse employees actually feel safe, and do they feel, accepted? And so if there's a gap, what closes that gap? Is it policy? Is it manager behavior? Is it culture? Is it all of these things? Is it something else? But I think, I think in the past couple of years, I've heard about neurodiversity a lot more than I did, in the long span of my career. And so you hear about I go to a lot of conferences, I hear people talk about neurodiversity at their company, and I often wonder about intent versus reality. So, what actually makes an employee feel like I can go to work and be myself every day? What is your research? What does the research sort of point to best practices?
Yeah. So, this is where, so I'm an astrophysicist, but I have the privilege of working at the Frisk Center with some real business scholars. And so what I'm about to say is not because I came up with it, but because my colleagues who are business scholars have told me that this is what the business research says. And that is that, in any large organization, you can think of a kind of an hourglass structure in terms of where the kind of the pinch point is in terms of like making organization or culture or intent just a reality. And that pinch point in the middle is basically middle management.
Mhm.
So, you can have C-suite folk, and this is important. You can have C-suite leaders who say, we value neurodiversity. We want our organizations to be more inclusive of neurodivergent people. And that's a really important, you know, leadership, flag to stake for leadership to do. But in terms of what the rank and file actually then experience is really kind of comes down to what middle management does, or how they translate that kind of leadership directive or even policy instruction from above. And so one of the things that we've seen, and I think organizations like Microsoft that have done this effectively, one of the things that you'll see that part of that success comes in equipping middle management to implement a kind of call it a cultural best practice that says to everybody, um, we value precision and clarity in communication because that is one of the ways that we're going to be a better organization and one of the ways that we're going to be inclusive of people who communicate, differently. And so, um, for any, to basically to open it up and to welcome feedback from anybody specifically around ways in which they see that communication could be done better. And better meaning more precise, more professional, more concrete, more clear, right? Like what that does is it kind of takes the burden off of the neurodivergent folks specifically to say, hopefully you'll feel safe enough to raise your hand and say, like, I don't get it. I don't understand what you all are talking about. No, rather what it says is we value precision in communication. We value clarity. And one of the ways that we can do that better is if everyone takes responsibility for identifying ways in which we as an organization or as a unit or as a group or whatever are not doing communication as well as we could by that measure. And so it
Yeah.
creates a kind of a shared responsibility, and in doing that, then the neurodivergent folks can speak up. But it's not because, like, I don't get it. I need this kind of special way of talking. It's because, no, because my middle manager has communicated this is what we value. And so I'm just doing my part to help my organization, my unit, my group be better.
That's it really, it's so interesting that you say that because whenever we think about wellness, whether or not it is, whether it's neurodiversity, mental wellness, physical, that we've always said, having it come from the top down is great, but it gets stuck. It gets stuck in the middle. So it feels validating to hear that the experts agree that's where the work needs to happen too. So I'm by looking at time, I'm going to switch over to some questions really for you both, so that we can also at the end get to a few questions that are in our Q&A too, although I think some of these questions will answer those. A lot of neurodiverse employees or people spend a lot of energy every day trying to appear neurotypical or to feel like they fit in. I'm sure we have people in our audience who experience this. What would you tell them? What would each of you tell them about the impact of this and how to manage it? Like how do you deal with every day trying to come to work and feel like that you need to fit in?
Yeah, I can start real quick. Um, so I mean, that's obviously energy that you're putting into covering that you're not investing in yourself, your work, your growth, your well-being. And so if you can, I'd encourage people to find ways to take advantage of the resources that are available. I saw a link dropped in for accommodations. Uh, if there's different support tools that exist. I am a huge advocate of using AI when it comes to clarity and finding clarity in ambiguous communication and using it to communicate back. I don't know what the policy is at Cummins, but I think that what I've noticed is that our neurodivergent employees are really thriving thanks to a lot of these AI tools. Um, you really don't have to navigate this on your own. There are, support networks, obviously the great work that's being done here with this group. Lean in to your trusted colleagues, lean into your mentors. If you feel safe, lean into your manager. That really does make a huge difference. And, I would just say that the goal isn't to fit into a system that wasn't designed for everyone. It's to lean into the tools, the support, the people that allow you to really do your best work. So, try not
Yeah.
to lose that energy.
Yeah. Kivan, do you have any thoughts
No,
on
I
this?
think Tarina said it great.
Yes. I think that, all right, that's good. I know that we've already had that question asked. The next one I think is a question that I saw briefly in the Q&A. You know, for someone who is neurodiverse, it's deciding whether or not you're going to disclose this to your manager or your team. So, Kivan, I'll ask you this first, but like what does the research tell you about, or what does your experience say about disclosure? When does disclosure help and when does it not? And really, I'm asking both of you. I'll start with you though, Kivan.
Yeah. So let me start with what I think is just the clearest statement of all from the standpoint of the research, and that is that um, individuals and organizations see the best outcomes when when individuals within the organization feel safe to disclose.
Hmm.
Okay. Disclosure, assuming that it's safe to do so, the research is just clear. Um, and think of that in the same context of what we've been talking about here all along about clarity and precision in communication, right? A manager, an organization, a team is going to be just better able to actually, adjust, flex, accommodate, whatever, all members of their team when everybody just kind of knows, right? Um, so that seems sort of obvious to say, but of course, it all hinges on whether it's in fact safe to disclose or feels safe to disclose. And the feeling safe is actually, you know, kind of as important as actual safety.
Yeah.
Um, so, um, so the advice that I often give, so I'm working in a university context, and so this question often comes up from students who are like, should I tell my professor, And the advice that I often give is, if you feel safe to do so, absolutely, you should disclose. That'll be better for you. It'll be better for them. It'll be better for everybody. You're more likely to kind of get what you need and be able to be your best if you're able to do that. But so then what about a situation where somebody doesn't feel safe and or maybe the environment is in fact unsafe? I think those are the really tough ones. Hopefully your organization is not one of those. Um, but I think that's where being able to communicate needs, rather than sort of, if you're not feeling safe to just disclose, an alternative can be to talk about needs that are in the context of what are seen as professional norms. So again, you know, pointing out ways in which communication could be better, could be more precise, could be clearer. That's pretty safe territory in just about any professional organization. And so that can be an easy, or I shouldn't say easy, that can be a relatively safe way to enter into maybe eventually getting to a place where you feel like it's safe to disclose.
Yeah, and I think Cummins is I would say, from my perspective at least, I think Cummins compared to, or given that we're 106-year-old manufacturing company is a safe place. But I think in any organization, um, there are pockets that you can't control and you don't know about. So I think I never want to rule out the fact that there will always be employees who feel like no matter how great the company is, they don't have that opportunity. So it's good to equip them. And I know, Tarina, do you have a perspective on this about disclosure?
Yeah, so our team supports across the disability spectrum. We call it pan disability. So we support employees who are blind, low vision, deaf and hard of hearing, neurodivergent. And with that, you get a range of visible versus invisible disabilities. With a visible disability, people oftentimes, not always in a virtual setting, but they know that person has a disability, may need to do things a little bit differently. Disclosure doesn't necessarily need to happen because people know, but then it becomes a self-advocacy. So how do you continue to self-advocate for what you need, which is a different challenge. But when it comes to invisible conditions, such as neurodivergent conditions, then what we do see, and I hear it all the time from candidates, I hear it all the time from employees, just like Kayvon said with students, do I disclose? And how do I disclose? And the first thing that oftentimes comes to mind is automatically disclosing their diagnosis, when in reality, it's each person's individual choice and how they tell that story, who they tell it to, and how how they're sharing it. And I wrote it down. Kayvon said, talk about the things that are professional norms. So instead of
Mhm.
saying, I have ADHD, I really struggle with task management or something like that, you could focus on what helps you be successful rather than feeling like you need to explain a diagnosis. So you could say something like, instead of leading with that medical condition, you might say, I do my best work when expectations are clear. Or having written follow-up notes helps me stay organized. Or really take advantage of those if you have one-on-ones with your manager. Use that as opportunities to share what helps you be successful in the workplace. And managers use those meetings as an opportunity to ask your employees what they need to be successful. It's one of the easiest questions managers can ask, especially if they know an employee is struggling. What can I do as your manager? What can Cummins do as your manager? What can Microsoft do as your employer to help you be successful in this role? And that may open the door to helping somebody feel more psychologically safe to ask for what they need. But yeah, I
Yeah.
think, yeah.
Well, we find, and I have found as well, simply asking someone about their preferences and how do they prefer to receive feedback? How do they prefer to communicate? So that you can find the best way to talk to them has been a very simple measure to understand people better. So, which leads me to my next question, which is, um, you know, are there everyday things that whether you're a manager, you're a teammate, that you can do to make a neurodiverse colleague or family member, friend, whatever, the people around you feel like they can be themselves? And my question was be themselves at work, but I think it's also in life. But without making it awkward, right? Without making a big deal about it, how do you just make somebody feel um, included? And you're not their manager, you might just be their coworker. Like, what do you do? Any suggestions or thoughts on that?
Do you want to start this one?
Yeah, come on.
Sure.
Come on.
So, one of the things that I try to model myself and that I encourage the members of my leadership team to also model is to try to find one thing from your own experience, like from my own experience that, and it doesn't have to be neurodiversity related specifically, but something from your own experience where you have in your life perhaps experienced some kind of challenge or where you've felt kind of like different from everybody else, and ways in which you've kind of like leaned into that challenge or difficulty or difference and like found that it actually kind of like empowers you in some way. Now, you know, you can't make that up, but I think most people in their lives have something like that, right? So I'll just share with you what mine is. And I share this with my students, and I find that my neurodivergent students just kind of relate to this specifically, even though it isn't a form of neurodivergence technically. And that is that when I was little, I had a pretty significant speech disfluency. And I was teased about it. I became very, very self-conscious about it. Um, and you have to understand now, students of mine are just like their heads explode when they hear me say this because, I'm a public speaker. I give public presentations like I'm doing right now, and the evidence of that speech disfluency is basically gone. Um, but, and I share this with my students, and I'm doing it literally right now. There was basically a trick that I learned thanks to speech therapy of a thing that I can do inside my mouth. I'm not even going to describe it to you. That basically allows me, like, with almost every spoken word, to manage that challenge. And I learned something really, really important through my life from that, which is that um, sometimes the challenges that we experience, if we can that in the process of learning how best to manage that challenge and just recognize it as a form of difference, can kind of, make us stronger and kind of more sympathetic and able to kind of connect across differences. So anyway, that I'm just sort of sharing my own version of that. But as you see, it doesn't have to be neurodiversity or autism related. to just kind of create an opening that says, I know something of difference, and I invite, you invite everyone on the team to, to share about those too, because, as we learn about our own differences and learn how to connect with differences in other people, it makes us all better. It makes the team stronger.
Yeah, that's sort of the foundation for inclusion. And when we talk about wellness a lot, which we do on my team, sometimes I've been doing this a long time and I want to boil it down for people and say, um, it's about being nice. It's about being interested in somebody else. It's about talking to somebody. I mean, really simple things that I think people think there is some special trick, and it's not. It's about human kindness. So, Trina, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Well, that's a hard one to follow, but I will quickly share. I I think that for me, and I'll jump off from where Kayvon left off with a bit of a personal story in that when I first started in this role, I had no idea how much public speaking I would have to do, and I despise it. I just really do not enjoy being in front of a group. I get really terrible anxiety. And with that, I found that I have to implement a lot of the tools that we teach others to use to support neurodivergent employees in the workplace. So things like just having really clear expectations, questions in advance. For a session like this, having questions in advance, I can go into it feeling prepared and my level of anxiety is way down. Otherwise, I go into something like this and my brain just shuts down. I can have a one-on-one conversation, no problem, but put me in front of a group of people and ask me questions and it's like an interview.
Yeah.
It just, I go blank. And so I think as colleagues, really thinking through like everyone has different invisible needs. How can you best support them and not judge them for it? How can you really be clear with expectations? How can you share information in advance when possible? How can you give really clear and direct and actionable feedback? And don't assume that people communicate and process that information in the same way. Ensure that there's shared understanding. And what we've obviously talked about quite a bit is just creating that really comfortable environment, being a nice human,
Yes.
asking what someone needs. It just makes a really big difference.
Yeah, I agree. Well, and so what I'm going to do, we have about 10 minutes left. I'm going to look at a couple of these questions in the Q&A and see and I realize that not all of these questions, I want to be honest with the audience. I don't know that we have the answers to all the questions that are on here, but we'll take a stab at it. And one of the questions is, and this is true because we live in a society that has now returned to work. Many companies have brought people back into the office. And somebody asked, what are some tips for working in the office? They said that they find it very distracting. And I can understand this. I realize now, probably if I got tested, I probably have some form of, but that wasn't a thing when I was a child. So we didn't do that. But I understand that about the distractions. There's interruptions, there's lights, there's sounds, there's other people on meetings. And this person said they feel that their work is slowing down. So, do either of you have in your work with neurodiversity, have you seen solutions that really work for this? And I saw another question in here where someone said, I'd really like to be able to wear noise canceling headphones, but I feel like I can't do that. And so, any thoughts on that type of question?
Yeah. We just implemented return to office as well.
Mhm.
I'm at home today, but the Redmond Microsoft campus is now back 3 days a week. And so our team is actually going through this a little bit. And my manager loves to play his Taylor Swift music. Kayvon, you'll appreciate this. Neil will come down the halls with his phone playing his music. And we're all like, just completely, you get distracted, regardless of what it is. So a couple of things we've talked about. Noise canceling headphones for sure. I think that having an agree if you're in a role where you feel like it's going to be a barrier for other people coming up and communicating with you, then just establish some norms for how and when you use those and how people come up and get your attention. We had a retail store employee that wore noise canceling headphones in a customer service role, and it worked really well. It worked for him, and he knew, how to best interact with his customers. So it's it's something that you can definitely think through a plan for how that's going to work. There's also these lights that you can put on top of your computer or at your office door that will tie in with your meeting calendar, or you can change it and it's the status. So if everyone on the team establishes a team norm for, if I have a green light, sure, come walk in my office,
Mhm.
come to my desk. If I'm red, please don't interrupt me. I think if everyone is doing it, not just one person, it makes it more of a team norm and
Yeah.
everyone will benefit from it.
Yeah, as a coworker, I would appreciate if I know what it's their boundaries, their preferences. I know how to navigate it easier. So yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I think
Um,
the only small thing I'll add is that we've found that even when we are all in the building, it can help sometimes, if we're going to have a team meeting, rather than convening in a conference room all together, what I've now done, what I now do with my team, just as a matter of course, without even now thinking about it or asking about it, is we do all team meetings, even when we're all in the building, in hybrid mode, meaning, we'll schedule the conference room. Those of us who want to gather together in the conference room, we do that, but we also have a video conference link available on the big screen in the conference room, so that other team members, even if they're down the hall or just on a different floor, but if they feel that they can best participate by not being in the same small room and the noise and on the lights and all that stuff, they can still be part of the team meeting. They're in the building, but they're just connecting in a multimodal way.
yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
and
that's great.
I'll build on that just a little bit because not only does it help with the sensory, but now that the technology is getting so good, if you are accessing a PowerPoint presentation or a transcript during your meeting, you can use it in real time to say, take a clip of that PowerPoint slide and be like, can you explain this to me? I don't understand it. Or, type into the chat what questions would be helpful for me to ask at this point in the meeting. And for someone who's neurodivergent, that really helps them to find ways to participate differently and control the style of learning and how they're receiving that information. So I love that. We do that too. And the option for hybrid is fantastic because some people want to be in the room with others, others don't.
Yeah, I think that's an easy win too. It's not something hard that to make people feel accommodated. But the other question, and I see in the Q&A, and we talked a little bit about disclosure, but do either of you have any guidance for the best way to disclose? So if I decided I wanted to tell my manager that I had that I'm neurodiverse or I have a diagnosis that fits within neurodiversity, is there any guidance for the best way to do that? How do you have any suggestions for that?
I think it's really a personal choice.
Yeah.
If you have people that you trust, you could practice. Practicing saying things out loud can always be helpful. Um,
Hmm.
but yeah, I mean, it is. I have seen disclosure go so many different ways and how it's presented, and everyone has to just choose what their story is and how they want to tell it. But just remember that it's a strength, and there you don't have to go into it with a medical diagnosis. You don't have to go into it with a deficit. This, you know, make sure to continue to focus on it as a strength and the barriers you're encountering and how the person you're disclosing to can best support you. Because most people want to do good and they want to support
Yeah.
their colleagues, but they don't know how. And so if you're going to disclose, it's also helpful to be able to share with them how they can best support you.
Yeah, I'll just offer a very, very quick tool, And I'm going to put a link in the chat for everyone. I hope it comes through. So Mentra is an online platform for neurodivergent job seekers that sort of, connects neurodivergent job seekers to, job opportunities. I think Microsoft lists jobs postings on this site, among others. But the reason I'm sharing it is because you can sign up for a free account, and what you'll see there is, I think, a really, really excellent kind of template for how to describe yourself in terms of your skill sets and your support needs.
Mm.
And I often point to this, whether you're looking for a job or not, just as a way of seeing, to having like specific language that kind of holistically describes you. So that it's not like just about the disclosure. It's not just about like, but it's like, this is who I am. I'm good at
Yeah.
this, and these are the ways I need to be supported to be my best.
Yeah, that I think that I just opened it so I could have it after this, and I could look at it and see how it might work for me. Um, I think and there are one of the things I want to tell the people who are on the webinar is I know there are a lot of questions we couldn't get to. Some of them, I'll be honest, if I don't feel that we can answer them, we don't go down that path. But if there are questions that you have that relate to programs or offerings that we have at Cummins, feel free to reach out to me. Even it's confidential. I'm not going to tell anyone that you had questions. It could be me. It could be Michelle Marks. She runs the It's Okay program on my team. We are happy to try to get answers for you. One of the things I want to talk about before we end is we do have a neuro inclusion employee resource group, ERG, at Cummins, which is really a huge tool. And I believe we dropped in the link in the chat. It's called It's Your Voice Matters. They're looking for feedback from employees, from neurodivergent employees. So that link is in the chat. So we encourage you to check that out. We also check out the ERG if you haven't already. For the resources that are out there, we do have other resources on our It's Okay website as well. So I wanted to make sure that we covered all of those. I know there was a lot of information dropped into the chat. So again, this will be recorded so that we can, if you want to go back and check out any of the information, you can do so. So with that, Kivan, Tarina, I really appreciate you guys joining us. This is huge. I think in the future, we might be coming back to you with more questions as we start to develop and expand on our support for neurodiverse employees. So
Yeah.
thank you both very much.
Yeah.
Thank you for
Thanks to
having me.
Tarina, great co-panelist. Thank you for the
Yeah.
opportunity today. Good luck, everybody.
Yeah, thank you so much.